This is a Sports Radio Live podcast covering your world of sports. Bryan Houston's Sports Radio Live. It's weekdays at 3 on 99.3 Talk FM, the talk of East Texas.
Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Once again, glad to talk to one of the great authors of American sports books and the author of a book called 12 Mighty Orphans. If you haven't read it, you need to. Jim Dent, how you doing, Jim?
Doing well, Bryan, and proud to be in East Texas today.
We're proud to have you here, and the reason we wanted to talk to you, we've been checking your updates on your Facebook page, and it looks like some big things are about to happen with 12 Mighty Orphans.
Yeah, there was a development right around Christmas. A guy named John Fox, who is a pretty big Hollywood producer, kind of swept in and picked up the cudgel on the movie. I think we're still a little ways away from seeing it, but a screenplay is in the works. Fox Studios, very interested in doing the movie. John Fox is not the same name as Fox Studios, but he works with a couple of other really big producers in Hollywood. Remember Marvin Davis?
Yes.
The big Hollywood mogul. Well, John Fox is tied to his son, John Davis. So for the first time, we've really got a spark. We got a screenplay going. I talked to my Hollywood agent a couple of days ago, and he thinks we could see it this year, but more likely early in 2013.
Okay, now for the folks who maybe have not had the pleasure of reading 12 Mighty Orphans, explain briefly what the story is about.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that you can get 12 Mighty Orphans on Amazon.com or at your local Barnes & Noble. I think you can get the trade paperback right now for about $10.
Yeah.
And if you want a hardback, write down this website. Go on abebooks.com, and you can get a pretty decent hardback for about $5.
Oh, man, okay.
Now that I've gotten through that 30-second commercial, 12 Mighty Orphans, I think, is my best book. It's about an orphanage in Fort Worth called the Masonic Home that started a little football team in 1927. They didn't have uniforms. They had 6 leather helmets. They rode around on the back of an old truck. They didn't have a football to practice with, but they had a coach named Rusty Russell. And 5 years later, they made it all the way to the Class A, and that was the biggest division in Texas, Class A state championship against Corsicana, and tied Corsicana in 1932. It's just an amazing uprising story of coming of age type of story. The Orphans also went to the state semifinals 3 other times in 34, 38, and 40. And it's one of those hidden gems that people either didn't know about because they were not that old, or it was just forgotten. And everybody says it's going to make a fabulous movie. I originally sold it to the wrong people 4 years ago, but it looks like things are starting to assemble in Hollywood, and I think it's going to be a great movie.
How did you find out about the story?
Bryan, it was really weird. I was watching NFL Films' greatest games, greatest highlights one afternoon. It just kind of I was working on another book and absent-mindedly watching TV, and all of a sudden this guy named Hardy Brown came on the tube, and they were promoting him as the meanest man in football in the 1950s. And that angle of the story really did not turn me on. But then I heard Hardy Brown say that he played football at the Home. And Steve Sable asked him, well, why were you so tough? He said, because I came up from the Home. And the next thing I know, there's a still picture on the screen of the Masonic Home in Fort Worth.
Oh, man.
Back in the 30s. And I think you know my style, my genre. And I said to myself, if there was a football team with orphans in the Depression and they were winners, I'm writing this book.
That's a great story.
You know, I was pretty lucky. I mean, it could have been, I wouldn't have seen that for another year or 2 or 3 years, and a friend of mine named Pete Stein said, Jim, he said, I watched that feature about 30 times and never thought of it as a book. But I look at things a little bit differently. So that I think it's a pretty interesting story, and I'm just blessed that I found it.
Well, it had to be first of all, it had to be kind of a heart tugger just to think about these kids who were, for whatever reasons were, alone, and then to find them all bound together to become such a winning team from a group of kids who had such a tough break in life.
Yeah, they did get a tough break. If you were a Mason in good standing in Texas and you died, then your kid got to go to the Masonic home. Well, in the Depression, there's no money and there's no hope. And if a kid loses his dad and his mom, and you're orphaned and it's the Depression, what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to go to the poorhouse is what you're going to do. You're going to grow up with rags and no education, and you're probably going to get lost and never find your way. But thanks to the Masonic home, they brought all these kids in. You could come in at age 5. The latest age you could come in would be at age 13. And, of course, you could stay till you graduated from high school. And it kind of later on, I talked about all the problems with equipment and all that stuff when they first got started. It actually became a little bit of a prep school because they attracted so many good teachers. Like I said, they attracted Rusty Russell, who had just made it to the state semifinals with Temple. And basically every kid went to college. And a guy named Miller Mosley went on to work on his PhD, ended up working on the bomb with Einstein because there was the friendship connection there. And Miller Mosley went on to become, for 39 years, one of the greatest professors in the history of TCU. So,
wow.
I mean, the success stories go on and on and on.
Now, I was looking again on the Facebook notes that you were making, and I saw where the coach, Rusty Russell, now you got some ideas about who you'd like to have play this guy in the movie, right?
Yeah, Tom Hanks' wife contacted us about 2 years ago, and she's pushing for it. I don't know, where they stand with it right now. The property no longer. I sold the story, but I'm being kept updated on everything that's going. But we're going to have a screenplay. Then you get a director, and then hopefully the director has a relationship with Tom Hanks, and Hanks is interested, and maybe it'll fall together. Maybe it won't. Hanks would be great, but there's a lot of guys who would be really good in that role.
Tell me a little bit about what you learned about Rusty Russell.
Well, I was very fortunate. I found his grandson, who is the COO worldwide of Smith Barney. And I called the offices in New York and told his secretary that he didn't know me from Adam, but would he please call me? And 3 minutes later, Russ Morton called me from Japan and said he had been hoping all of his life that someone would come along and write this book. He actually said somebody like me, but that's kind of bragging on my part because I'd just come off the Junction Boys. And Russ Morton had kept notes on his grandson for years and years and years. When they went fishing, when they went hunting, when they were at a football game, whatever. He fought in World War I, lost his eyesight in a mustard gas explosion.
Wow.
On the way home on the ship, told God that if he would give him his eyesight back, that he would not only coach, but he would do something more for mankind. He got his eyesight back. He went to Temple, was one of the top young coaches in the state, saw the orphanage job came open, and fulfilled his promise to God. He went and coached the little orphans. He invented the spread offense. He drove the bus. He did everything. He also taught math and ended up being the principal of the school. I mean, this is one of the greatest people. This is one of the great Texans of all time. Rusty Russell ended up coaching at SMU for a while, was one of the reasons that Doak Walker got the Heisman Trophy. I could go on all day, but maybe the best solution would be to read the book.
Yeah, and to imagine this guy was just anonymous until you came along and had the wherewithal to write the book.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. You know, Brian, in pre-television, in those days, history didn't record like it does today.
No.
You know, we when we think about sports, we kind of start thinking about it around 1961. Because that's when the TV age of sports began. This started happening back in 1927.
Wow!
I mean, I went back into the archives of the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the Fort Worth Press, and found a treasure that I didn't know about, that a lot of people didn't know about, but television had not exposed it. So, I guess we were all lucky that the story came about.
What's the latest on Courage Beyond the Game, the book about Freddie Steinmark? Is that still in the works as a possible movie, too?
We have been trying for 5 months with the same investor to get the development money, and as of Friday, even though there were promises made, we hadn't gotten it. So we may have to look elsewhere. All this is doing is slowing the process down. We'll find investors for this.
Sure.
We'll find the development money in 30 days once we go out and start looking again. I think Courage Beyond the Game is going to be a great movie.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think you've read it. I don't think there's any question about it. I think that Freddie Steinmark's story is very inspirational. I think it's Bryan's song. If anybody is interested in investing in the movie, you can go to Jim4Dent at yahoo.com. You can go on my Facebook page. You can go on SuperBowlTexasStyle.com and contact me. And
outstanding. What's your next project? What are you working on right now?
The Big 33 game, which is a little bit, it's kind of a combination of the Junction Boys and Remember the Titans. It's a story about a game that was played between Texas and Pennsylvania from 64 to 67 called the Big 33 All-Star Game. Texas lost the first round in 64 because they only had their second stringers. Bobby Lane, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, what player was the coach, the great Bobby Lane. In 65, he got the first stringers. He got Super Bill Bradley out of Palestine.
Yeah.
He got Jerry Levias out of SMU, on his way to SMU. And they won the 65 game. But Lane had to go to Governor John Connally to make sure that the North-South All-Star game did not conflict with him taking the first stringers to Pennsylvania on August 14th, 1965. It's an interesting story. I mean, I could go on all day. It's a real study also of the end of segregation of football in Texas. And Texas had a wonderful history, the all-black system, the Prairie View Interscholastic League, and I touch on some of that too. So it will be out in the fall of 2013.
Now, are you still thinking about doing the LSU book?
The LSU book has been put on hold until 14, and I'm sorry to say that because I know you're an LSU fan, but I've put it on hold again. I wanted this Big 33 book to come out about the same time that the Freddie Steinmark movie came out.
Sure.
So I wanted everything to be in a big circle here in Texas. So that's why we put LSU back to 2004.
Okay, but I'm counting on that book coming out now.
It's a good book. I mean, I've got the contract on it, and I'm looking forward to doing it. I think the timing would be better a year later.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, thank you very much for coming on with us today. We wish you the best of luck in getting this movie made. Again, I can't wait to see what they do with the book, the 12 Mighty Orphans. The book's tremendous, and I can only imagine the movie will be just as good.
Bryan, it's always a pleasure to be on your show, and I look forward to seeing you again on Facebook.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a great day. Jim Dent, the author of the 12 Mighty Orphans, on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.
This is a Sports Radio Live podcast covering your world of sports. Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live. It's weekdays at 3 on 99.3 Talk FM, the talk of East Texas.